Thank you. I'm very honored by the invitation to talk to you tonight. I like to, first of all, thank, I don't even presume to remember all the names that you mentioned, but I second my thanks. I like to thank the Reverend Gretchen Persson and Mike Zimmerman for their very warm friendliness and remarkable efficiency with every conceivable arrangement about this event. In this age of disclosure, I must tell you that whenever I give a talk, I bring with me my own claque, my own cheering section. And tonight, in addition to my wife Paulette, I'm delighted that my youngest daughter, Nicole Auerbach, is here from Chicago, and she brought with her one of her 3 sons, Zachary. Zachary is a 12-year-old scholar and athlete, I hope in that order. Before I want to make a housekeeping remark. My wife always reminds me that when I give a talk, as I speak, gradually and without maybe wanting it, the loudness, the volume of my voice goes down gradually, but almost to a level of inaudibility. I'll try to avoid doing that tonight, but again, in case you cannot hear me, please wave your hand and I'll make the proper adjustments. In my talk tonight, I will simply relate a number of personal recollections from events that are important to me, which when they occur years later, they were classified as belonging to the larger and to me incomprehensible historical event which is called the Holocaust. Let me, by way of background, I think we need to, okay. I was going to say a few words about my parents' family. In 1940 or around there, my parents were Sephardic Jews. They were born in a city called Monastir, which at that time that they were born was part of the Ottoman Empire. Later, and today, it's part of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, and it has a Slavic name called Bitola. My parents migrated from the city to Greece after the First World War. They settled in Athens. My father was an accountant. They had 3 sons. I was the eldest. At the time of my major recollections, which started in 1943, my parents were in their 40s, and the ages of the children were 16, 13, and 10. Perhaps I mentioned that my parents were Sephardic Jews. I don't think that it's necessary for this audience for me to explain what to explain the term, but so you know how I use it. Let me say just a few words. I use the word Sephardim to denote the descendants of the Jews who lived in Spain and Portugal for several centuries and who were expelled at the end of the 15th century, and which most of them settled in parts of the Ottoman Empire and some of them in North Africa. My first recollection that I remember is the day that my parents stopped smiling. Quite suddenly, out of the blue, as if a black cloud had invaded our house, making everything dark, my parents didn't smile anymore. We children did not understand the reason why, and they did not explain. We think there was nothing particularly disturbing either in the radio or in the press of that day, but I think they knew something, but they didn't tell us children in order not to frighten us. I think I need to take a little bit of time to acquaint you with some events which were occurring at that time as background, because without understanding these events, then you cannot understand my earliest recollection or any of the other recollections that will come later. All right. In April of 41, Germany attacked simultaneously Yugoslavia and Greece. First of all, having obtained permission from Bulgaria, they were the allies of Germany at that time, to come with the troops through Bulgaria, and then they attacked west and south. In a very swift campaign that lasted no more than 3 weeks, then both countries were conquered. And 2 months later, the territory was divided into 3 occupation zones. They're shown in the maps that you can see in different colors. The Bulgarians, as a reward for their collaboration, they got parts of northern Greece, Thrace, and parts of Macedonia, and also the part of Macedonia that had been part of Yugoslavia before the war. The Italian area was the largest. The German area was the smallest in extent, but it happened to contain almost 80% of all the Greek Jews. The historian Hilberg, historian of the Holocaust, has called this circumstance geographic fate. For almost the first 2 years, the Germans treated the Jews in their territory, in their zone, no differently than they treated the rest of the Greek population. However, that came to an abrupt break, and the big blow came in March of 1943. Almost simultaneously, the Bulgarians and Germans in their occupied zones, they rounded up the Jews and deported them. Deportation, that's all that we knew at that time. Concentration camps, gas chambers, and crematoria, all these things became known only after the end of the war. Let me note here that in the Italian zone, the Italians did not persecute Jews. In fact, in some cases, they were actually helping a number of Jews from the German zone to escape. But that also came to a sudden end. In September of 1943, Italy signed an armistice with the Allies. Almost within 24 hours, German troops occupied what had been part of the Italian zone. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, the commandant of the German authorities in Athens summoned the chief rabbi and the chiefs of the Jewish community and asked them to produce the list of all the Jews in the community. The leaders had destroyed the list, and then they let out word that everybody ought to try to disappear, to go into hiding. This brings me to the second major recollection, which is when my father convened for the first and last time that I remember a family council. We met around the dining room table, and my parents explained that we were in grave danger, that we had to go into hiding. It was impossible for us to move together because there were 5 of us and my maternal grandmother, 6. And it was really very dangerous to try to move as many people in one new place. So the day after the family council, we just took whatever clothes we could carry with us in a bundle, And my mother and two younger brothers went to a family, Christian friends in a suburb. My father went hiding with a Christian colleague, and I went to the home of a high school schoolmate. His name was Thanasis Michalopoulos. What did hiding mean? Hiding meant that you can't venture out except occasionally in the middle of the night to sort of fight claustrophobia. After 2 or 3 weeks of this thing, I knew that I couldn't stand this sort of regime, and there was nothing in the news that would say that Germany was about to be defeated, and this condition could last for another year, 2 years. I simply had to get out. Where? How? I had no contact with the resistance. I decided to tell Thanasis, my school friend, that I wanted to join the partisans, and I was quite surprised and shocked when he told me he wanted to join the partisans. He knew where we should go. He wanted to come with me. He was the only child. His parents didn't know and shouldn't know. And could I ask my father for additional money to pay for his fare? We were going to go someplace in northwest of Athens, in Thessaly. So I went to see my father. I told him what I had decided. He tried very gently, he was a very mild-mannered man, he tried very gently to dissuade me from what I wanted to do because I was young. Life in the winter was very, very harsh. Being with the partisans was a very dangerous thing. Then I should not do that. But when he saw that I was determined, he accepted it, but he exacted a promise from me. He said that traveling to the mountains and going through various checkpoints, if I was discovered to be a Jew, then I should make a run for it, so I would be shot, killed, but not fall alive in German hands. It was not until many, many years later when I myself became a parent that now, in thinking back on that, I can almost begin to understand the kind of pain or what must have cost him emotionally to exact that kind of a promise from me. I didn't go to say goodbye to my mother. I was afraid that she would turn out to be a lot more persuasive than my father, and that she might ultimately succeed in completely deterring me from doing what I intended to do. So I didn't go to see my mother, never saw her again, and this is a decision that I have regretted all my life, and it continues to haunt me. In any case, Thanasis and I went on a truck, because there were no buses at that time, and after a 2-day journey, we got to the town of Karditsa in Thessaly. At the bus depot, we met the high school teacher, who very kindly gave us shelter for the night. Then I was more surprised when Thanasis asked him, how could we make contact with the partisans of EDES? That's an acronym, EDES. It was a right-wing group. And the teacher said, well, they were here until very recently, but after a fight with a much larger group, ELAS, E-L-A-S, then they retreated, and now they are in Epirus, which is the north part of Greece, near the Albanian border. The following day, in the morning, Thanasis told me that under no circumstances would he think of joining ELAS, but he understood my predicament, that he was going to go back to Athens on foot because our funds had been exhausted. And I can still see in my mind's eye Thanasis walking south, following the railroad tracks. Let me summarize, in the interest of time, my service with, we lost the slide. Okay. That comes in a moment. After Thanasis left, I asked the teacher, where can I go and meet the partisans? So he turned west to the mountains and pointed, he said, there. And I started my ascent. And close to reaching the summit, then I began to see a structure which had lots and lots of windows and a couple of bell towers. It happened to be a monastery. But the thing that shocked me was that I saw on the side of the road Italian officers and soldiers fully armed. Imagine, a month earlier they were the enemy, talking like friends with Greek partisans with their scraggy beards and the bandoliers across their chests. It was later on that I learned that a whole Italian regiment, after the armistice, joined the partisans with their weapons and all their gear. I found the leader of the partisans in a cell in the monastery, and I told him very simply that I had come from Athens and I wanted to join the partisans. And in words that almost completely echoed those of my father, he said to me, "You're very young, this is very, very tough life, and especially fighting is very, very dangerous. That if I wanted to help the resistance, then the best thing for me would be to return to Athens, join the underground, and do my part." Then I decided that I had to tell him the complete truth. I told him, I'm a Jew, returning to Athens is out of the question, it would be suicidal. And to sort of bolster my plea, my argument, I said, as far as the harshness of mountain life, I was a Boy Scout. His reaction was the same as yours. He laughed, and he said, "All right, you can stay. We'll find something for you to do." I came out of that cell. I was ecstatic. I was accepted. And the first thing I did was to take that false identification card with a Christian name and tore it to pieces, which was a stupid move because it would have been a good memento, but I threw it out. And I just went around to everybody who would listen. I introduced myself with my real name. Again, in the interest of time, let me summarize what I did with the partisans. It's, my service with Elas lasted for about a year. First, a month after I joined, I was given a mission. I was 16 years old, 16 and a half, and I was put in charge of a contingent of 2 Italian officers, at least twice my age, and given the order to go to various places in the mountains and build bridges. If anybody is interested, we can go into details in the question and answer period. But let me simply say that in retrospect, it's really a surreal and very amusing episode. And the mission failed miserably. We didn't build a single bridge. For most of the year, I was with the regiment. I was a communications and cipher clerk. I participated in one small skirmish with German troops. I was wounded superficially, very lightly. And I couldn't communicate with my family. It was almost impossible. But I thought about them constantly. I was very optimistic about the post-war period. I was going to go to university, do great things, make my parents proud of me, and be an example to my brothers. In October of 1944, the Germans began to retreat from Greece. Nobody was pushing them away. Very simply, the Russian armies were already in eastern Bulgaria, advancing rapidly west, and very quickly they would have cut off and trapped the Germans in Greece completely. So they left, and the partisans didn't engage them in any big battles. We just did simply harassing action with their rear guard, just to speed their retreat a little bit faster. Again, let me, with a few words, summarize my eventual return to Athens. But I just recall that to tell you that all these plans that I had made in the mountains, I remember doing them when I was sitting on a rock, always faced south towards Athens while thinking about that. The regiment was headquartered, if we're going to get, this is this map. I think by now you must have concluded that I like maps, and that's the case. This simply shows the shaded portion that says Trikala and Karditsa and so forth. This is where the regiment operated. We'll do that in a moment. While we were stationed in Larissa, a strange woman that I did not know came and told me that she was bringing news from my family. All were very well and very anxious to see me, and she gave me money for the bus fare. So a week or so later, after her arrival, I took the bus and I got to Athens on the 12th of November of 1944. I only found my father. When I asked where my mother and brothers were, my father was too emotionally wrought to even answer me, but one of our neighbors, Mrs. Shabetai, said that tragedy had struck many Jews in Athens, including my families. We didn't know where they were, but we were all praying about their eventual return. I think this is an opportune time now to mention to you 2 or 3 vivid recollections of my wife, Paulette. At the time of the liberation in October 44, she was 11 years old. Her family had been hiding for about a year. Let me read you what she wrote. During the 13 months we were hiding, we lived with 3 different Christian families. When our host or my parents thought that the neighbors were becoming suspicious, we moved. On one occasion, my older sister took me to a house I didn't know and left me there for 10 days, while my parents looked for another refuge where we could go and be together again. I felt lonely and abandoned. In the 3rd and last hiding place my family moved to until the liberation, I shared a room with my sister. Occasionally at night, I could hear the rhythmic beat of boots of patrols in the street. I thought they were coming to arrest us. I was terrified. I would pull the blanket over my head and hold my breath as long as I could so that they would not hear me and find me. To this day, when I have to get an X-ray and the technician tells me to hold my breath, I panic and feel like covering my head with a blanket, and I feel a huge relief when she says, breathe. Let me pick up now my own recollections again. It's early 1945, the war is still raging in Europe, and the very first news, and more importantly, the pictures that one begins to see of liberated concentration camps, plus the beginning of a trickle of people returning to Greece. It was a trickle, but the horrible news gave us the first inkling of the disaster that had happened to the Jews of Europe. But the small trickle of returnees was eroding our hope for the return of our loved ones. But happily, my brother Sam returned in August of 1945. The story that he told, let me explain very briefly what this map indicates. And this is, again, stories that my brother told us. In the beginning of March of 1944, March turned out to be a very unlucky month for the Jews of Greece. The Germans began to round up any of the remaining Jews in the former Italian zone, and both from the islands, both the Ionian and the Aegean islands, and deported them. My mother, two brothers, and my maternal grandmother, who had then joined them, they were arrested, taken to a basement and beaten severely. And this is what I got from my brother. My mother was severely beaten to reveal my and my father's whereabouts. She didn't know, of course, where I was. And if she knew my father's hiding place, she didn't reveal it. Instead, she berated her tormentors, telling them that they would be severely punished for their deeds. From this recitation from my brother, I got an indirect inkling, or at least a part of my mother's character that I certainly didn't know. There was no way of knowing, and I think happily children don't know that aspect of a parent's character, namely bravery and defiance in the face of brutality. A couple of years ago, my brother Sam was asked to give a talk to a group of high school teachers in Greece who were being trained to teach the Holocaust in high schools. I'd like to read you a couple of short passages from the talk that he gave. What I'm going to read to you is my translation from the original Greek text. Quote, "For survival in the concentration camp, hope had to die first, not last." End quote. End quote. "I triumphed over Auschwitz-Birkenau. I triumphed over Buchenwald. I survived 5 selections when someone called doctor looked you over when you were a sack of bones to decide whether you can last a bit longer. With a motion of the hand, left or right, he commanded either a short extension of life or death in the gas chamber on the following day. And I triumphed over the so-called death march of January 1945. Am I proud of these victories? I assure you no, because I didn't struggle for these victories. They just happened. I didn't achieve them. Nature and the steel of which a human being is made of did the job." End quote. There are echoes, I think, to me, of Primo Levi, especially his book, Si questo è un uomo, if this is a man. I think it's fair to say that all of my talk so far has been on a small scale, and that's inevitable when one deals with personal recollections. I would like to increase the scale now in two steps. This is a picture of my brother, a very recent one, of Sam. Okay, the first step is at the level of the family, my parents' family. You can see that of the immediate family, half of them was wiped out. And the extended family, the aunts and uncles and cousins, most of them living in the region that was under Bulgarian occupation. That's where most of them went. There was a very high percentage of loss, 76%. At the level of Greece, all the three zones, you can read you can see the statistics. They are terrible. The Bulgarians sent about 13,000 Jews, or delivered them to the Nazis, who then sent them to Treblinka. Nobody ever came back from Treblinka. The Germans sent about 65,000 Jews to various concentration camps, and only a trickle returned. The total number of Sephardic Jews killed in all of Europe during the Second World War has been estimated to have been roughly 100,000. This is only 1.7% of this nominal number of 6 million. But 75% of the 100,000 are the Jews that lived in Greece and in part of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. In March of 2003, I understand that very recently Professor Aaron Rodriguez was here and gave a lecture. And maybe he showed this slide, which I'm about to show you, but let me also quote from his lecture, which I had heard in Washington. The Holocaust destroyed the Ashkenazi heartland in Europe. It also dealt a death blow to Sephardim in the Balkans. A culture that had lasted for 8 centuries was no longer. And in March of 2003, there was a ceremony in the Memorial Museum in Auschwitz-Birkenau for the unveiling of a new plaque inscribed with a text in Ladino. If anybody would be interested, afterwards I can read you the text in Ladino. It was installed as a result of efforts by Sephardic survivors, a full 36 years after the other 22 plaques had been installed. Thank you for listening. Paulette and I would be very happy, or try, to answer any questions you may have. Yes?
You ever have further contacts with your schoolmate that turned back?
It's a tragic thing. Thanasis, you're talking about Thanasis. Well, I returned to Athens in November of 1944, after the liberation. December was a horrible month. Maybe some of you know it was the month of troubles, to borrow another term, because, alas, the left-wing group fought against the government and against the British who supported them. So there was a mini civil war, most of it concentrated in Athens. I had lost contact with Thanasis. After the smoke cleared, so to speak, I went to his house to find out how he was and also to thank his parents for sheltering me. Thanasis had been killed in the little mini civil war in December of '44. He was a member of a rather rabid, very, very far-right group. And I don't know, he didn't have any reason to be out in the streets, but he had gone out shooting a revolver, as I learned, and he was killed. I never saw him, Thanasis, again.
It's still possible to have the slide, the last one? Or
If you leave your name, I'll send it to you.
no?
Oh, you want? I mean, the last slide I saw the plaque.
The last one. The last one. So this is written in Spanish. but
Yes,
the-
yes.
but
It's very
I'm
short.
very moved by one thing is that the autograph you use, it's between the Catalan and the Castilian.
Yes,
And for instance, the NY is the Ñ.
yes,
That's the way you.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
But it's Latino.
Yeah, it's Ladino. When I was telling you earlier about my parents being Sephardic Jews, I should have mentioned that the lingua franca, the language that they spoke, their mother tongue was a Castilian dialect that had been transformed over the centuries, depending especially in the countries that they were in, borrowing from Turkish words, Italian words, depending where they were. And this dialect, this language of the 15th century, now comes under the name of Ladino, Judeo-Español, Judesmo. This text was written by Professor Sefiha in Brussels, who is a linguist of Judeo-Español. So I imagine that this is the correct Ladino.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I want to read you the Spanish thing, but let me give you the quick translation. Forever let this place be a cry of despair and a warning to humanity, where the Nazis murdered about 1.5 million men, women, and children, mainly Jews from various countries of Europe. Auschwitz, Birkenau, 1940, 1945.
Did you speak Ladino, your family, yourself?
My parents only spoke Ladino to each other. We had to speak Ladino to my grandmother because she did not understand any other language. Sí. Yes.
Why is it that we don't really hear about Bulgaria's role
Oh,
in the
Madam, you open. Let me simply say a few words, all right? First of all, let's all exult on the fact that 48,000 Bulgarian Jews were saved. This was the word of really a handful of very wonderful people, a politician, some lawyers, and other academicians. But it was really touch and go. And although they were not deported, their property was confiscated, and they were moved to the countryside. They were severely traumatized. And a proof of that is that in '48, when the State of Israel was founded, 95% of the Bulgarian Jews left. My bone with the Bulgarian officialdom is that they have not yet really fully accepted the complicity in the killing of 13,000 Jews in the occupied territory. I've been to meetings with officials of the Bulgarian government, and when you ask them that question, they say, oh, they were not Bulgarian citizens. But they fail to tell you that one of the first acts as soon as they occupied the territory, was to pass a law with the Orwellian title, Law for the Protection of the Nation. It was a purely anti-Semitic set of laws. They confiscated every penny that they had no civil rights. In other words, it's like saying, okay, I'll take all your civil rights, you have no citizenship, now I can kill you. I wish that the Bulgarian officialdom, and I emphasize that because I don't believe in collective guilt, they would really finally face what their complicity in the death of 13,000 Jews, including 27 of my relatives. But they haven't done that. Go ahead.
Were you able to find out precisely what happened to your mother and your brother and your...
Oh, yes. Well, it's very simple. As soon as, first of all, in the roundup that I showed you in the last map with the yellow area, when the last roundup, my mother, two brothers, first of all, they were, after their arrest, they were put in an internment camp just outside of Athens, but it was near a railhead, very convenient to be put on the cars. It was, as I said, the last transport to leave Greece. When they got to Auschwitz, then as soon as they got off the train, then I'm sure you've seen the pictures or you read about it, then somebody with one movement of the hand, my mother and youngest brother were selected to the gas chambers, and my brother for labor. And that's how he survived that. He was sent to a smaller satellite camp around Auschwitz-Birkenau. It was called Budi. It was an agricultural camp, and essentially they carried out agricultural chores. But then when the Russians started coming in, that's when the famous death march. The death march was the following. There was no railhead at the camp, so they had to march them to the nearest railhead, and this was the 50 kilometers or so in the middle of the winter, where most of them dropped, you know, on the snow, and they were shot, and those that made them. And that's why I think that my brother, although he says he didn't struggle, I'm sure he struggled a great deal to survive. I'm sorry, yes. I'll get to you. Yeah.
And if I may ask first, are you able to speak freely about the work that you did in the underground resistance? Can I ask a question about
Sure.
the nature of the work you were doing?
Yeah.
Did you have any connection or communication directly with Allied forces via shortwave radio? And
I'll tell you the whole thing, okay? The whole thing. It so happened that where I was, in the mountains from Karditsa, in the Pindos Mountains, there was a natural plateau. It was almost as if it had been cut by a knife or steamrolled. And this became an emergency landing field. Now, first of all, they had parachuted a number of English and later on a few American officers who were then the liaison with the partisans, and who really essentially gave the partisans tasks to do. For example, when the partisans blew up the Aspropotamos river, a railroad river, it was at the request of the Allies, because the railroads were carrying equipment that was eventually going to go to North Africa and equip Romo. So we had a permanent contingent of English officers. Then occasionally, after a successful task, then 2 or 3 liberators, bombers, they would overfly. We had to go out and light fires to signal them, and they would drop supplies. Occasionally they would make, I don't know, some of us thought that they had done it on purpose. They dropped 2,000 shoes, but all of them the left foot. You know, so we use them, but we simply cut out the toe of the other one so it would fit the other shoe. I saw only one Russian officer, but he had come from Yugoslavia. He was with the Tito forces, and I didn't see any Americans at all. Yes, we had, and they had the shortwave radio, and that's how they communicated, and that's how we got the directives. Yes?
Did you have difficulties with immigration to the U.S.?
Difficulties? I told some people at the dinner, for reasons which I cannot even fathom, why my parents never bothered to get Greek citizenship. I came to the United States with a Yugoslav passport, because since the town where they were born in had become part of Yugoslavia, and then our records were with the Yugoslav embassy in Athens. So when I was ready to come here, I got a scholarship from the B'nai B'rith Hillel Foundation. I traveled with a Yugoslav passport. I had no difficulty. Years later, when I was drafted in the American Army, and I was about then to be posted after basic training, and although I was a graduate communications engineer, they didn't send me to Fort Monmouth, because if you remember, it was the McCarthy era, and that was the famous dentist who was a communist or whatever it was according to McCarthy. And I'm sure that those who were deciding where to post soldiers, when he saw my Yugoslav passport, he didn't send me to Fort Monmouth, they sent me to Colorado Springs, which was better. Yes.
Okay, once, at the end of the liberation of Europe, and even a few years later, when Franco's regime became again palatable for the international community, there was a strong propaganda coming from the Francoists that they have saved a lot of Greek Jews. And we had recently in that conferences, we had Professor Aaron Rodriguez from Stanford.
I know
and
him well.
And he gave the number. The number is much smaller than what has been emphasized on. It's a number of going to 400 people, but no more. Is that what you...
Not even that much. But let me tell you, a couple of...
you think?
Excuse me?
You think it's more than 400?
Oh, no, less, even less than that. It's very simple. Look, a couple of cousins of mine were among that group. You know, people in, you have to remember, I mean, the creation of the Balkans, people came from other Balkan countries, part of Turkey, and, you know, some of them were citizens of Bolivia. They didn't even know how to spell the thing. One of my cousins, or second cousin, was a honorary consul of Bolivia. So quite a few of them had Spanish citizenship. All right. So therefore they could not be massacred outright. They were gathered up and sent to Bergen-Belsen. And this is where most, now a few of them, with the intercession of the Spanish consul in Salonika and Athens, were able, through tremendous adventures through France and occupied France, to end up in Spain itself. But most of them really weathered the war in Bergen-Belsen and were liberated. No, I thought that you were going to refer to, even after post-Franco, I think a genuine move on the part of the Spanish government to welcome back all the Sephardic Jews back to the mother country, but it was too late, 400 years too late.
One more question, just one more question.
One more question, okay.
What was the culture like in Athens after liberation? How were people friendly to each other, or how was the rebuilding of Athens?
Are you talking about, I mean, generally at the broad level? Look, there was a great deal of suffering. The winter of 1941 was, first of all, very severe, one of the coldest winters in experience. And I remember also it was the first time that we as children saw snow. A few flakes fell, and so we rushed down to build a snowman, but by the time we were going to make a little clump, it had melted. So, but it was a very rough winter. Hunger was horrendous. I mean, you walk in the streets, and in the beginning it was very shocking to see dead people. In the beginning there was a little bit of a fuss, pick them up or call the ambulance. But after a little while, you just simply walked by as fast as you could and sort of forget it. But there was no other trouble in Athens. Athens, if you count the port of Piraeus and some of the suburbs, was a teeming city of close to 1 million. The reason my wife's parents left the small city of Volos was because they were very well known there, and you go to a city of close to 1 million, you can hide. After the war, the only thing that I can say comes close to your question about the relationship was the aftermath of the troubles that I referred to in December. One of the aftermaths is that I was taken prisoner and sent to a British concentration camp in Libya. But that's another long story, and you're going to have to invite me for another session. I'll tell you. Well, the reason was because somebody said, well, he was a partisan. So they came and arrested me, and they didn't ask any questions. They put me on a board ship and sent me to Libya. So I was there for a couple of weeks. That was the last question. That's it. All right.